Hello everybody, this is Gregory with 5-Minute Catholic Apologetics and Living, where 5 minutes every time may get you to the divine. Today we're going to talk about place names. How a lot of non-Catholics don't even realize that much of the United States is named after Catholic saints. Now before we begin, let's start with a prayer. Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritui Sancti. Amen. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto, secutor in principio, et nunc et semper, et in saecula saeculorum. Amen. Now before we begin, you can tell clearly I'm near the water. I'm sorry if the audio quality isn't the best or the video quality because the sun's coming in. I'd love to show you the sunrise over the Seattle skyline, but I can't because then it's just going to be all whited out. So I'm staying in a little place that literally is like 6 feet from the water. So behind me is Puget Sound. Puget Sound is connected to a large strait that separates Canada and America called Juan de Fuca. Now, as a child, I was really into geography. I was such a geography nerd. I mean, some kids, this is the 80s. Some kids were into math, engineering, whatever. For some reason, I loved geography. I think it was probably because my father instilled in me a love of history and geography. But by the time I was 8, I knew every capital in the world in the country's location. I mean, even obscure countries. And that love of geography kind of fueled me through my high school years and even to graduate school. So if you haven't gone, and I'll see if I remember to put it up here, like who is Gregory? I went to graduate school in Alaska, and my master's thesis was Spanish exploration of Alaska and its effect on Alaska place names. Go read it. Either way, so that's kind of the genesis of this episode, is I think that a lot of Protestants don't realize like how much of the Americas was named after Catholic saints or Catholic feast days or whatnot. Now, this is understandable because we know that the two main powers that discovered and colonized the Americas were Catholic, right? The Portuguese and the Spanish. So we're not really talking about South America because clearly over there, pretty much every river, mountain, whatnot is going to have some Catholic origin. But here in North America, in Canada, which is not far from here, and in the United States, I think people forget that this is the case. If you look at some of the most well-known towns, of course, the obvious ones, right? San Diego, San Francisco, Los Angeles. You think of in my state, Corpus Christi. Is there like another town that's named for something Latin? It was named Corpus Christi because these Spanish explorers, when they were, you look over in Florida. Florida's got tons of Spanish place names. St. Augustine, probably the most famous. But all through the United States, when these Spanish explorers were coming around here in the late 15th century through the 16th century, when they discovered a river or an inlet or a bay or whatever, they would use the feast day calendar. They would use the calendar, the Catholic calendar, the liturgical calendar, and they would name things after whoever's feast day was for that particular day. That was very, very common to do that. And so going back to my Alaska thesis, there are towns in Alaska and bays and whatnot that are named for Spanish place names because there were Spanish exploration in there from about 1776 to 1792. There's about 8 expeditions that went all the way to the Aleutian Islands. So today in present-day Alaska, Valdez, you remember that famous oil tanker spill that happened over there back in the 90s? The town of Valdez is a Spanish origin name. You look at, there's a town called Cordoba, which is also in Prince William Sound, named after, God, it's been 25 years. I think it was like a viceroy. They named it after him. So all these Spanish explorers were around there and naming these islands. There's an island where the town of Ketchikan is on that was originally explored by Spaniards, and it was called Revillagigedo, named after the viceroy, but the Alaskans call it Revillagigedo Island. And then further down here, like where I'm at right now, if you guys know anything about these islands over here, tons of Spanish. There's Port Angeles. Like, where do you think that name came from? Port Angeles. You have Lope de Aro Islands. You have the San Juan Islands, right? There's just tons of stuff up here. And so What does that really mean? It doesn't really mean anything, right? The first people come here, they're going to name it after their things. Later, George Vancouver came over here, and certainly on the East Coast, you see John Cabot and Henry Hudson and all these people. They're naming things in English or in Dutch or whatever language it is. You see the Russians did it in Alaska. So, I mean, it doesn't really mean much on one level. You're going to name things after your kind of heritage and tradition. But I think it is a good reminder that to the timelessness in the history of the Catholic Church. The longest institution of human history is the Catholic Church. And so when you look at these explorers 500 years ago, 400 years ago, right, they're representing their faith, they're representing their culture, and all these imprints still exist today. And you're not necessarily going to see that with the megachurch or even John Nelson Darby, who invented the rapture 150 years ago, right? They're not going to be these vestiges or remnants of those things, but certainly the Catholic faith all around the world. We're not even talking about geography, right? You look at history, you look at international law, you look at botany, you look at science, you look at Copernicus, right? There's a great book, I think Thomas Wood's, How the Catholic Church Invented Western Civilization. You Protestants would be like, oh, I'm not going to read that. But I would really give it a serious thought, because I think people forget that much of Western civilization was Catholic civilization for the large majority of it. And in fact, the Dark Ages were not necessarily the Dark Ages. There was a lot of discovery and development during the Middle Ages. And much of that was impelled by the Catholic Church or the Catholic faith that these people were adherent to. And I think it's just a nice reminder when we're looking out here of all these Spanish place names just around the Pacific Northwest, that the Catholic Church has been around a long time. We're going to continue to be around a long time, because the gates of hell will never prevail over it. It might be a smaller church, it might be a leaner church, but we're always going to be around. And I think just Protestants, just remember, like, a lot of these towns that you live in, Catholic, historically Catholic, all your ancestors were Catholic at one point if you're European. Whether you be a Lutheran or a mega churchy, you go back 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, depending where your ancestors were from. They were Catholic. Everybody in Europe in the Middle Ages was Catholic, or if you're from Eastern Europe, they're going to be Orthodox. But everyone, all the Dutch, all the English, all the Spanish, the Portuguese, even the Scandinavians after the conversion from the Norse mythologies. That was around 1000 AD when the Catholic missionaries. You read a lot of history books that say Christian missionaries went to Phil. No, they were all Catholic. They were all Catholic. So yeah, you might be a megachurchian or you might be third generation Mormon, but all your blood is Catholic. All of it. Guys, post in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, take care and God bless.